All right, if you're here, then that hopefully means that you already watched part one. If you haven't watched part one, stop now, go back, listen to part one, because there was a question that was asked at the very end there. If you're following on, the question was, well, if you're looking through a refractor, isn't your image flipped upside down? I'm going to answer that now.
It's just something to take into consideration. When you look through a telescope, you're actually not looking at it the way, it's like almost like looking into, when you look into a mirror, you're not looking at what you actually look like. You're looking at a flipped image of yourself. And refractors, you're actually flipped upside down and the other way. Actually, I can't remember now. Newtonians are flipped because they're using mirrors. So it is something just to keep in mind. There is, oh my gosh, there's a piece of equipment. It's driving me crazy. I can actually picture it. There is angle. Oh my gosh, what is it? It's going to drive me nuts. There is something you can actually put in and then put the eyepiece into it, and it'll correct your image because you're working with mirrors. So if you're using a refractor, you've got a lens at the front, the light's coming through the lens, down a tube, hitting a mirror at the back that's at an angle, and then coming up into the eyepiece. If you're working with a Newtonian, you're working with two different mirrors. So you're working with the primary mirror, the light comes through the end of the telescope, down to the back of the mirror, shoots back up to the front of the telescope where there's a smaller mirror, your secondary mirror, that's at an angle, and then that shoots out to the eyepiece. So you're flipping it once and then flipping it again and then pushing it out to the eyepiece. So because you're working with mirrors, you're rarely, if you're looking through an eyepiece, looking at it, looking at an object the way it's meant to be, or the way you would see it with your eye. So just something to keep in mind. It's not that you can't use it during the day, but there are certain telescopes that I wouldn't use mine during the day. But what I do recommend if you do first get a telescope, I do want to say, Rob, what you recommended about the binoculars, great, really good advice, because if you just have a pair of binoculars sitting around, then you're not spending a ton of money on getting a telescope straight away. But I'll tell you, using a set of binoculars can be more frustrating than using a telescope. So if you actually master using a set of binoculars first, that'll really help with starting to use a telescope. Because I think one thing people don't consider is that you're looking at things in the dark. So it is really disorienting to go out and start looking at the night sky because you don't have the references that you would have during the daytime. And a lot of times, well, especially if you've got a larger telescope, you're looking really far into space. And so you kind of have to get used to that. So I do recommend, and I'll be careful with this recommendation because you don't really want to be having your telescope out during the day because you don't want to point your telescope at the sun for any reason. You definitely do not want to look through a telescope while pointed at the sun. You'll do a lot of damage to yourself and to the telescope. So I would say maybe even at sunset, maybe try to use, I always recommend people when they first get their telescope, try to see if you can spot something far away, like maybe a signal tower on a hill or a tree off in the distance, and see if you can try to line up that tree in the telescope, because it is a bit difficult to just trying to learn your telescope in the dark. Makes it a little bit easier and you can actually see with your own eye what you're doing, and it'll help you just get used to it. Just get used to how it moves, and focusing, really important. Learning how to focus on objects, because every time you look at an object, you're looking at things at different distances. So when you're looking up into the night sky, when we're looking at it from Earth, everything looks like it's at the same distance away. It's just like the moon looks bigger than a star, but that's not really what it is in reality. The stars are bigger. They're just a lot farther away. So if you're looking at a planet, it's a lot farther away than your moon. So the focus that you use on your moon is not the same focus you're going to use on Jupiter. The focus you use on Saturn is not the same focus you're going to use on Jupiter. And then if you're going deep space objects, your focus is different again. So that can be really tricky to try to figure out in the dark. So try different focuses in the daytime. So if you can get, like Rob mentioned, we're on the river. So I've even shown people to look down the river and then looking at like a light post off on the motorway across the river far away, and then moving to, there's a couple buildings and things that are further down, and then even just messing with your focus and things then. It's a lot easier just to start doing that stuff when you're not having to figure out how to do that in the dark as well. So when you started with yours, did you start right in the dark or did you start during the daytime?
No, mostly during the daytime. I found it really fun because I had the zoological background to spend more time looking at things like birds, and I could see bunnies and fields across the way. And also at the observatory, it was just kind of fun being able to see like the docks across the way and like the trucks going by. But the other reason you want to do it during the day is it's really, really useful for training in the spotter scope. I know we kind of glossed over that there at the very beginning. The spotter scope is like a second scope stuck onto the side of your main scope, and most of the telescopes that you will buy that are in the kind of €200 range as like a beginner telescope will have some form of spotter scope. What you want to do is make it so that what you're seeing at the center of the crosshairs on that scope is the same as what you see when you look through your main body of the telescope. And the easiest way to train that up is during the day, looking at something like a tree or a light post, like Danielle says. So what you want to do is point the big telescope at something like a tree, in the distance. A tree in a forest is probably not a great idea because it's really hard to differentiate which tree you're looking at. So, a large building or something in the distance that's a particularly unique color is a really good way to go about it. And then you just fine tune the little spotter scope on the side so the crosshairs are lined up exactly on that building as well. Because what it is much easier to do if you're then looking at the moon is to use the spotter scope. You can get right down and look through it like you would like an old-timey kind of pirate telescope and move it until you can see the moon through that. And then when you look through your main telescope, the moon should be in focus or very, very close to it. So doing that during the day is a lot easier than doing it at nighttime. And there's a lot of stuff you can see during the day as well that you obviously can't see at night, like nature, which can be a nice compensation for cloudy nights, which we have plenty of here in Ireland, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does get a bit tricky. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about investing in a telescope is how often you're going to be able to use it. Because if you do live in a place where it's a bit cloudier, then you're not going to have as many opportunities. Where if you live in the desert, fantastic. Get the most expensive thing you can possibly afford because you're going to have lovely clear evenings. But yeah, no, it is something to take into consideration. If you have the budget for it, great. But if you are considering something good quality, and you're thinking, oh my God, I just spent €2,000 on this piece of equipment and I use it once a year, that's not great. But it is a challenging, I guess is the right word, for living in this sort of environment, this climate here. Ireland is great sometimes because one thing that's nice about living here is that we are really far north. And so in the winter time, we have a lot of dark sky, which is fantastic. So, I mean, I can be at work and we can start planning an observing session and have a day picked out, and we can start prepping for that 4:00 in the afternoon and start observing as soon as the work day is over, because it's already dark by 5-6 o'clock, which is great. And then it'll be dark right into the really early morning hours, like 6 a.m. It's still dark, 7 a.m. still dark. So we get a lot of dark time. The issue is the weather. So using an optical telescope like this, you're using visible light, like what we can see with our eyes. You can't see through the clouds. And so having good weather is important. You also, and I don't think this is talked about a lot, but just the weather in terms of moisture is really important too. You don't want your telescope exposed to a lot of moisture, which is a really difficult thing here in Ireland because it rains a lot. And we are also on a river at the observatory, so we deal with this a lot. But a lot of the lenses and the eyepieces and things are coated, and the mirrors are coated. So having a lot of moisture sitting on there can tarnish the mirrors. It can do a lot of damage to the coating and things and to your lenses. So you want to be really aware of your weather. And there are a lot of great apps out there that you can use to track your local weather. But it's something that every astronomer has, whether they're professional or amateur, a good weather app and multiple. You check everything because you don't want to put your equipment at risk. You don't want to be set up in a field, especially if you have heavier equipment that you can't quickly move. You don't want to be set up and then get a surprise sprinkle, a surprise rain shower, even a sprinkle. You don't want that. So just being really aware, watching your sky, always watching for clouds, because even recently, we were out a few weeks ago, we had a forecast of a purely cloudless night, and we were really excited about it because we'd have a lot of time with the telescope. We went out, we got a few objects, and then we were working on a galaxy, a spiral galaxy. I think it was Bodes, actually. And all of a sudden, the images weren't coming out clear. What the heck's going on? And we were so focused on actually getting the image right that we hadn't looked out of the observatory. So it's a bit difficult when you're inside the observatory. You can't really see certain directions. So we didn't realize there were clouds moving in. And we went out and it was completely, one side of the sky was fully clouded over and they were coming our direction. And then we checked our apps and even on the radar and things, it wasn't showing up. So it was quite shocking that these clouds were overhead. They must have just been maybe just thin enough that they weren't showing up. I'm not really sure why they weren't showing up on the radar, but we weren't expecting that. And this was one of the things, having a second person out with you is actually really helpful because you kind of have somebody to be watching the sky. Because weather can be unpredictable, especially in a place like Ireland. If you're out in a drier area, I really envy you because you don't have to worry about these sorts of things. Really. I'm assuming you have a lot more warning when you have these kinds of things happen. But yeah, you just want to be really careful with that. They are very sensitive to even just a lot of moisture in the air, especially if you're working with open systems like a Newtonian. So just something to keep in mind if you are living in a damp area like Ireland or like my good friends up in Scotland. They deal with this in the same kind of way we do. I will say one last thing though about that is that it makes it much sweeter when you get a nice clear night and you have a lot of time on the telescope. It just makes you really, really appreciate that time. So it's definitely worth it even if you're living in a cloudy area. Do you ever get to use your telescope, Rob? Or is it completely out of commission?
It's just gone. I've actually lost it. I dropped it pretty badly as well. And it wasn't built like an ETX. It immediately broke.
No way.
So yeah, I don't get to use it very often at all. I haven't had as much use of telescopes as I used to when I first started working at PCOs, which is kind of disappointing. But that said, I'm getting a better appreciation of the night sky from a whole other perspective, because I'm in an area that's much darker than I'm used to. And I was actually going to say, like, a lot of people do say, right, I've developed an interest in astronomy, I must immediately go get a telescope. Nope. There are like 3 or 4 steps you can take to set yourself up for success before that are probably more financially responsible and are, not as reliant on things like weather and budget and everything. The first thing you should probably do is get familiar with the night sky and like your orientation. So like learning your north from your south. Getting familiar with the phases of the moon. When is there going to be a full moon? How can I predict that? Because full moon is going to make it harder to see fainter objects. It's almost a source of light pollution. You want to learn to identify, but you don't need to learn constellations, but it's helpful to learn constellations because you can then use them as a reference. Like if you're trying to point out a random star to a person in the sky, it's quite tricky. You can't really just point and be like that one, because you could be pointing at any one of 100 things in a section of the sky. Whereas if you're like, well, look at Orion and the star that's just off his left shoulder, that's the one I want you to focus on right now. That's much easier because Orion is a shared cultural touchstone for a shape in the night sky. So learning to identify certain constellations is really, really helpful in your journey. And perhaps the most fun, beginner activities to learn which of those stars, quote unquote, are actually planets. Because after a while, you'll have it like down pat. It's just like, no, that's Jupiter. That's definitely Venus. That's definitely Mars. You don't even need to do the like I'm going to whip out the app and see if what I'm looking at is Mars. You just get an eye for it. And it's really, really cool. It's almost like an instinct that you kind of train into yourself. That's going to come in really useful when you finally get the telescope to help you figure out what you should be looking at. Because that was really tricky for me. I started trying to use the telescope before I was 100% comfortable finding the planets in the night sky. I had to keep going back inside and using this app, which is fantastic. It's called Stellarium. It's free, it's open source, and there's a million tutorials on YouTube on how to use it. That's another step you can take right now to start learning how to identify stuff in the night sky. But without Stellarium and like a rough idea of where I should be looking in the night sky, I couldn't find Saturn, Jupiter, Venus initially. Once I knew where they were with my naked eye and I was able to just start pointing the spotter scope at them, I got way quicker at finding these planets, and it just became second nature. I have absolutely no problem finding them now. So learning to identify them, really, really cool, and something that you don't have to be in a dark sky for, as we said earlier. It's actually almost easier to do it in the city initially. I really shouldn't be saying that. We don't like light pollution. Light pollution is bad. End light pollution now. But the one benefit of light pollution is it makes it a little bit easier to find a planet when you're starting out. But then speaking of light pollution, the next step is go enjoy a dark sky if you've never done that before. Just go somewhere where there's zero light pollution and take in the Milky Way. Take in like the billions of stars that you can actually see with the naked eye that you couldn't see in a more urban or suburban area. And maybe then consider getting your telescope. So there's all of this stuff you can do to get yourself into this hobby before you ever have to spend a penny buying a telescope.
Yeah, I think with the dark sky, I think I just from my own experience, I was really excited when I got my telescope to get out to a dark sky area because I got very used to the stars in the city and seeing planets from the city, and I really wanted to get out and see other things. But it had been so long since I had been out in a really clear dark sky, and I got really lucky. I was outside of Bantry. I was in, I can't think of the name. Let's say Ardmore, but that's not right. Ardfield, something like that. I was out West Cork area, and I was out on a really clear night. So it was springtime. So you get those kind of frosty nights still. So real clear sky, and there was no moon. So all of those things are exactly what you want. You want to be in a dark sky area, no moon in the sky, because the moon can act sort of like what city lights are. And they blow out the moonlight blows out the fainter objects in the sky. So no weather, no clouds at all for the entire night. It was actually fantastic, but it was overwhelming. And I know the night sky. And I was absolutely, I had the telescope set up. I had it put out early so that it could get, you want your temperature inside the telescope to be equal to your outside. And so I had it out there kind of getting ready for the night and everything. And I barely used it. I spent most of the night just staring up and just looking. And I think part of it is just because I rarely get to see a sky like that anymore. And ended up taking a lot of landscape, just setting up the camera and taking pictures of just the sky instead of taking pictures through the telescope, which is what I intended to do. But it is really, if you are living in a city, you forget, or maybe you haven't even experienced what a real dark sky is like. And it is really awe-inspiring when you get out there. So bundle up, because it's always cold at nighttime. People will forget how cold it gets at night. This is something in astronomy just in general. It is not for people who hate the cold. You are going to be cold because you're going to be outside and you're at night. I have a whole kit at the observatory just sitting in one of the drawers at work, where I have like thermal leggings that I put on underneath. I have waterproof pants that go on top of that. I've got gloves that have the fingerless gloves so that I can actually use the equipment. And then they have like wool caps that go over them to keep the fingertips warm. And I've got hats. I've got scarves. I've got everything you can think of. Boots, fur-lined boots, everything. I got the thermal socks, double-line hiking socks that I wear 2 sets. I wear a thin layer of socks inside of those, inside of the boot. So even in the summer, I don't use it. Wouldn't use the boots as much, but even right up until late spring, the last time we went out, I was still using my boots. So it is a really cold hobby, just something to keep in mind. And the learning the night sky really great advice, Rob. Because there's no point in starting to point your telescope in different directions when you don't know what you're looking at. And you'd be surprised how much you can actually see. I do run across people who don't even realize you can see planets in the sky without a telescope. And you have 5 naked eye planets. That's including Earth, right? So it's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Nope, not including Earth. You've got 5 planets that you can actually see without a telescope, and just with your eye. And so even just being able to pick those out in the sky and getting an idea of when planets are out, because they're not always the same. So stars have patterns. So you have certain constellations that are visible certain times of the year, and then they set and they don't come back for 6 months. So you always have this fresh rotation of stars in the sky. So that's something to keep in mind too. Maybe you don't even realize that the stars aren't always the same. Depending on the time of the year, they change. But they're pretty predictable. We know when we're going to see certain constellations in the night sky, where planets are not. So planets are on their own schedule. They're doing their own thing in the sky. This is how they got their name. It comes from, the word planet comes from Greek, which meant wanderer. So against the stars, they're wandering around. They are not, they stay in the same plane. So they're not moving like north and south and things, but they're not always visible at the exact same time. So this is why you see a lot of articles when you'll see 5 planets are going to be visible in the sky right now, is because that is kind of exciting. You don't always get to see a lot of the planets at the same time in the sky. So we just lost Jupiter, for example, maybe about a month ago. I'm losing track of my time here. But we'll have Saturn coming around very soon, and Mars as well. So just getting an idea of when you can see what. And there's so many cool apps out there. Rob mentioned Stellarium. One of my favorites that I've been using actually for years is called Sky Safari. And what I really like about Sky Safari is it has you have 2 different modes. So you can use it with, I think it's a compass or something, where you can move your phone. And as you move your phone, the sky changes on your phone. So depending on where you're pointing your phone, your sky on your screen changes. So it's lined up to your night sky. And that'll help you get an idea of what you're looking at. And the other thing about it too is that it's like Stellarium, where you can actually fast forward time or rewind time. So you can actually see, if I want to check what time is the moon coming up tonight, I can change my sky to the nighttime and see where the moon is going to be. I can see what phase it is. If you go a step further, if you click on some of the objects in there, like the moon or a planet or a star, it'll tell you all the information in there. So it gives you a history, how it got its name, and those sorts of things, which I find really, really cool. And so that's a bit advanced, and maybe you don't want all of that information. There are a lot of other, I know my mother uses one that uses AR. And so when she's pointing she moves her phone through the sky, the screen changes to match the what she's looking at in the sky matches what she's seeing on her phone. But then it's also using what's visible in the foreground. So if her trees from her garden are visible, she'll see that on her phone, which makes it even easier to line up what you're seeing in your night sky. Ooh. So that's really helpful, because like she's not the most familiar, but she's been using this for a couple of years now, and now she loves it. So I get updates all the time, and now she's telling me, oh, this is up tonight, or I'm going out to look at this, and she's gotten really into it. So there are a lot of tools out there to help. And you can, is Stellarium the only one you use, Rob, or do you have a different one that you use?
No, I only use Stellarium.
Stellarium, yeah, Stellarium's a really good go-to, because that's a great intro. If you start with the app, you can also download it on your computer, and you have more advanced features on the program that you download on your computer. And if you do get a telescope and you want to start using software to navigate your telescope through the night sky, you can actually do that with Stellarium, which is pretty impressive considering this is free software. So it is a really good piece of software to get used to, and to start basically kick off your astronomy journey. And I think Sky Safari I've downloaded a whole bunch, but that's been the one that I keep going back to. And when I get a new phone, first thing, one of the first apps I download again, and get into that. So it is interesting when you really start digging into it, you start realizing you can see a lot more than just planets. You can start differentiating between stars as well. You can see red giants with the naked eye. And when you start really looking up, you start realizing that the stars aren't all the same. They're not just little white points in the sky. You'll notice different color variations. You'll notice that the red giants do look kind of orangey, rusty red kind of color, and you'll start to be able to pick these out. And so there's a lot to explore. It's not just stars in the sky. There are even some, like if you get out to a dark sky area, there are a few objects, a few nebula you can see with the naked eye. If you're in a really dark sky, you might even be able to see the Andromeda Galaxy, which looks like a little smudge in the sky. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, I'm really jealous because you've got 2 satellite galaxies. They have the Magellanic Clouds down there. You can actually see these with your eye. You don't need a telescope or a camera or anything like that. So there's a lot to learn, but I hope that doesn't put you off. I hope that becomes just a part of the journey of getting into it. And one thing that can be really helpful, because it can be a bit overwhelming, there is a lot to learn when you get into it, is finding your local astronomy club. There are so many astronomy clubs around in all these different countries. I've spoken to a lot of people in a lot of different countries around the world in the Astro game, and hooking up with your local astronomy club is a really great resource because those people already have equipment. They can guide you through do's and don'ts. And a lot of times you're able to use some of the telescopes and things that they have and get an idea of what kind of telescope you like, and it gives you a good idea of what you can see in the night sky with different types of telescopes without even having to spend a ton of money. So they're a great resource if you can locate your local astronomy club. Any other tips you got up your sleeve and your Astro space sleeve there, Rob?
Yeah, light. The beginner thing that I always forgot about was you need like 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust to the dark. I always knew they would need to adjust, but I didn't realize just how long it takes. So use torches and lights and everything by all means to get you to a location safely. Do not cut corners there, but then turn it all off and wait 20 minutes and give your eye every opportunity to adjust, because even I forget to do that to this day. It's another reason I love Stellarium, is because it has this awesome red light feature, so you can still have it with you to help guide you, but because it's in the red light feature, it doesn't mess with your eyes quite so much. So definitely take that into consideration, and don't beat yourself up if you're like, I went out there for 10 minutes and I didn't see a damn thing. It's not your fault. Just give your eyes another 10 minutes to adjust. And the other thing I would recommend is trying to find ways to align this new hobby that you're going to explore with other hobbies. Because as Danielle keeps mentioning, it really is awful weather here in Ireland. In fact, you mentioned that Bantry was one of your best astronomy experiences. It was one of my worst. I went to Bantry very recently, and it is supposed to be, beautiful night sky, but I just got unlucky. The weather wasn't great. I couldn't see anything, but I still had a great time because it was an area of really, really cool, outstanding, natural beauty. Benin Heritage Park was close by, so I was still able to explore that Astro link through the stone circle and its links to the moon. And Glengarriff National Park was cool, so I was able to go hiking all the same. So I would say, try not to put all your eggs in one basket. Find ways to salvage a trip. So, if it's making sure there's a cinema nearby that has late night screenings, if you travel all the way to a place and you like movies. Weather's crap, okay, well, you're going to the movies instead. So, it's not a wasted trip. So just whatever it is for you, try and cultivate a second hobby, or just find a way to make it align with another hobby that you already have. And you won't feel resentful of the fact that you've traveled all this way to go see something and then that you've missed out. But yeah, I find that it does seem to breed this kind of outdoorsy vibe in people. In fact, we had an article that we co-wrote with George McMillan from Dark Sky Ireland last year in the Examiner about how hiking and dark sky appreciation are just perfect bedfellows. It's an awesome way to get one hobby going if you're into the other, and vice versa. So if you're a hiker who's never gotten into astronomy before, start hiking in dark sky places. But equally, if you're an astronomer who's spending maybe a little bit too much time sitting at home watching Netflix, maybe get ready to start hiking. Get your hiking boots before you get your telescope and start walking around some of Ireland's awesome dark sky places and taking in the night sky instead.
That's really good advice, because a lot of astro clubs, if you do find some, they'll do star parties. So it is, when you are in a location where the weather isn't great and isn't really predictable, planning a star party can be a bit daunting because you're planning to go out to a dark sky location, which might be a bit remote, and then you don't have things like cinemas around. So these groups will pick star parties as a way of getting everyone together. So it's more of a community vibe, so that if, you know, the clouds are there and you don't get a chance to actually get out and do some good observing, at least you're there with a group of people. They're a lot of fun, and they'll have other activities happening, and usually plan kind of dinners and stuff around this. And a lot of the people that are in these groups have like camper vans and stuff, so they're out, they're used to being outside and being out kind of in the wilderness, so they'll have some kind of fun activity to do. So it is a good point to maybe combine those two together, or find something you can kind of maybe mix hiking and Astro together, that kind of way. And the light is so important. Your eyes have natural dark, what's the word? I was say dark seeing. That's not the word I'm looking for. Night vision. So your eyes actually do know how to adapt to low light settings and dark. And so if you ever sit in a dark area, or just sit outside in the dark, you'll notice that when you first get out, if you come out from a well-lit house and you go outside, it's really hard to see things. But if you sit there long enough, you start to see more detail. And what's happening is that you have chemicals in your eye that release when you're not around a lot of light. So it activates this sort of night vision. And it's helping you see, it's making your eyes more sensitive to light. So it's helping you see better in the dark. So like Rob mentioned, it takes about 20 minutes for those to build up. So you're at max night vision. So blue light destroys that night vision. So that's what you have. We have a lot of that during the daytime. And this is why you have a lot of things like blue light filters on your phone. And I'm sure with the newer phones and tablets and things, you've seen this on there. And so if you are planning on going out, you want to protect your night vision. And so putting things like a blue light filter on your phone, so that if you do need to use your phone, you're not ruining that night vision. If you're taking a computer with you, like maybe you're running software to run your telescope mount, then you can get the same kind of filters for your computer as well. You can get these to kind of make it look red, looks like a red filter is laid over your screen. And you can get specific headlamps and torches, flashlights, things like that are for nighttime observing. So you can get red ones and you can get red flashlights. And this is really, really helpful because that way you can see through the dark, because the red light is still going to let you see as you're walking through a field, but you're still protecting your night vision. So we use red lights inside of the dome when we are using the telescope upstairs at the observatory. To just try to protect our night vision as much as we possibly can, and also not to interfere too much with the telescope itself. So I just want to wrap this up, and I have one last question for you, Rob, before we go. Unless you have any other tips you want to give out?
Any other tips? Oh, I guess I did kind of lean in heavily into how awesome hiking and hill walking and all this are, but I know that's not necessarily accessible to everybody. So you don't have to get into rugged terrain or off-road to get into this hobby. There are actually, particularly on the West Coast, I'm not as familiar with the East Coast, but tons of car parks along the Wild Atlantic Way that are in areas that are actually pretty dark as well. So, if you're not up for hiking, or if it's just not an option for you, you can park up in these car parks. Just make sure that you have, a reflective vest on or something, so that you don't get, overrun by a sudden appearance of another car.
You're not responsible for people being knocked down.
So take all the safety precautions in the world, but yeah, you can just drive to a car park along the Wild Atlantic Way that is not light polluted if hiking just isn't on the books for you right now, if you might have an injury, or it's just, your fitness levels aren't up to being able to do that, or for whatever other reason that you can't do it. Don't let it, discourage you that you're not feeling up to hiking up a mountain or something. There's always a way to get involved.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So my last question for you is, do you have a favorite constellation in the night sky?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Orion. Cool, yes. Rob. Well, that was my answer. But go ahead. Let's hear your answer for why this is your favorite.
Well, it's really easy to spot. It's got the cool belt, which I think is pretty much the first concept. Maybe the plow is the first one that everybody figures out how to identify, but after that, it's like the belt of Orion. But also, Orion has a shoulder that may explode at some point in the future. And I just kind of relate hard to this guy in the sky who's got a bad shoulder. I'm like, me too, buddy. Me too. How about you, if it's not Orion? Or why do you like Orion?
Okay, well, my back is a bit busted up, so maybe that is why I identify with Orion so much. Orion it's a really big constellation in the sky, so it's visible in the wintertime, and it is, maybe because you're able to see, like I said before, here in Ireland in the winter, we have so much darkness, so maybe we just get to see Orion a lot. It also has the Orion Nebula in it. So I mentioned before, there are a few things in the night sky you can see without any sort of equipment. And you can actually see this without a telescope or binoculars or anything. You can see the Orion Nebula with the naked eye. Even within the city. I've seen it with my own eyes, even in Cork City. So if you're looking up at Orion's belt, and those are the 3 stars that go across. Right below his belt, it looks like 3 or 4 stars in a line. But actually what it is it's about 200 stars, I think, altogether in that area. It's essentially a nebula, a nursery for where stars are being born and created. So you have all these stars that are there, and you still have this gas cloud nebula around it. And those gas clouds are really reflective. So they're reflecting all of this light back to us here on Earth, and all these stars are in a really close space, close proximity to each other. And so because they're giving off so much light, the light's being reflected back to us, we're able to see it with our own eye. And when you look up at it, it just kind of looks fuzzy, like fuzzy stars. That is what you're looking at. You're looking at the gas cloud of the Orion Nebula. It's also one of the first ones that, if you do get a telescope, we didn't talk about this, but you don't need to really get, if you want to start off doing astrophotography, you don't need to get a fancy camera to do it. You can start your phones. You can start off with your phone. The phones we have now, the sensors inside of them are so good that you can take pictures of things like nebula in the night sky. Now, you're not going to get something like the James Webb Space Telescope of images, but you can get pictures. You can get finer detail that you wouldn't see with the naked eye. And the Orion Nebula is a good one because you're able to line up your telescope using your eye first and then looking through. So just something to consider if you are trying to take pictures in the night sky using the Orion Nebula. That's a good one to start off with. Since you stole my favorite constellation, I guess I will tell you another one that I like. I have a lot that I actually like. But since we talked about Orion and it's a winter constellation, I'll give you a summer constellation to look at. If you are out and you're looking towards the south, you will be able to see Sagittarius. And an easy way to spot Sagittarius is that it looks like a teapot kind of on its side. So it looks like a teapot that's being poured into a cup and its handle is sticking up. If you're here in Ireland, if you're here in Cork and you're looking towards the south, it'll be just at the horizon, just over the horizon. So it's pretty low in the sky. And it's an easy way to then figure out where the Milky Way is. If you're unsure where the Milky Way is in the night sky, because the Milky Way will actually be rising up from that teapot spout like the steam from a teapot. So it's a fun one because it's visible during the summer months and then it sets for the winter time. So Sagittarius is a cool one. All right. Well, I think this is a topic that has a lot to it. We could do a whole other episode again on this and get even further into more detail about do's and don'ts. I think this was a good way to start off, though. If you do have any other questions, if you're considering getting a telescope, this is kind of around the time people start thinking about this. End of summer is when we start to get queries about, I know we're start of summer, but end of summer is when we start to get queries about Christmas time things. So if you're starting to think about telescopes or thinking about buying something, get in touch with us. We're more than happy to help out with anything we can and kind of guide you in the best way we possibly can. And this has been a lot of fun because this is absolutely my favorite topic. I love talking about telescopes and I won't stop talking about them. So be careful when you do ask me questions about them. Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off here, Rob?
Yes, let us know if aliens are living amongst us or on the moon, and if you have any evidence that we haven't seen. Also, give us your theories on whether or not the moon would taste like strawberries during the strawberry moon. Other fun names you've heard for moons, and maybe why you think they are called what they're called, and we'll see if we're collectively calling the moon all kinds of fun stuff.
Moon tastes like strawberries. That's annoying.
What does the moon taste like?
Cheese, Rob. Obviously cheese. Everyone knows that. Anyways, let us know. I'd absolutely love to know if anyone has pictures of aliens. Please send them in to us, and we will have our experts take a look at them. Actually, Rob, he's our resident alien expert. That's what's on your business card, right, Rob?
There's a lot of things on my CV that don't bear tighter scrutiny, but yep, sure.
All right. Thanks for joining us today. You can always catch us on all forms of social media out there. We're on everything. So just type in Black Rock Castle Observatory. You'll find us. Leave us a comment there. You can also leave a comment on this video below. And we'll catch you next time. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye, folks.